All right, guys, welcome to another podcast episode of the Gedunk podcast with myself and co-host Bobby Jones. We've got a very fun and hopefully informative guest joining us today in Trygve Olson. Trygve, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Dan. How are you doing?
Where are you right now? Where are you geographically?
I am in Arlington, Virginia today.
Okay, awesome.
You know what? This year so far has been wonderful. I have been 1K or Global Services on United literally for 15 years, and I have
Uh-huh.
maybe taken one flight, maybe two, all year. So
Nice,
I'm
nice.
so happy about that.
Well, we are excited to have you on today and chat about some of your work. Trygve is a very kind of I would think influential intellectual in kind of this space in sort of the pro-democracy movement. And I'd love for you to just kind of tell our audience a little bit about how you ended up in this work and your background.
Yeah, so my background really is two roads. The road often traveled is working in politics in the U.S. and really starting off in my native state of Wisconsin. Grew up in a town just really kind of a small town. It's still pretty much a small town, although no, it's more suburbs of the Twin Cities. Um, and went to college where I could try and play ice hockey, which I didn't really do very successfully, but I still like to play.
Nice.
And when it came time to get a job, I had worked on some campaigns because they had changed the drinking age in Wisconsin from 18 to 21, and I missed being grandfathered in by about 3 months, which was my reason for becoming politically active. I knew I wasn't going to play in the NHL, and the closest that I could find to it was campaigns. So I went out and politics. I went out, was on Capitol Hill for about 3 months, and was working for a member of Congress. Had a wonderful chief of staff, and she sat me down and said, "You really are better suited for campaigns. You should go back to Wisconsin." So I was back in Wisconsin running campaigns. I was working Tommy Thompson, and along the way, I got asked to go over to Poland in 1993 to do an MTV Rock the Vote style campaign for an organization that was run by John McCain called the International Republican Institute. Um, and the idea was to work with young Poles that voting was important, and it was something that the U.S. used to do a lot of.
Let me,
Now we're not. And
yeah.
so that led into me getting to know all kinds of stuff about international stuff.
What was that like in, so 93 were, 4 years post Berlin Wall falling.
Yeah.
Was was there enthusiasm among the electorate? I would imagine
Yeah.
there's sort of this newfound sensation of, freedom, we can vote, or was it a habit that had not yet been built?
So it was, it obviously wasn't a habit. Voting was a habit because they were forced to vote. They only had one party they could vote for, right? Because it was an autocracy during the sort of Soviet period. Um, so Lech Walesa was the president of Poland after independence, and it was an awakening to me because I met Walesa. And the truth was, for me as an American meeting Walesa, I could have met Christ himself, and it might have only been an equal deal, right? Because he was Lech Walesa, a man who had torn apart the Soviet Union. What I had forgotten is he was a ship welder from Gdansk who scaled a fence when everybody else was afraid to scale a fence and became the leader of a movement, right? So and there's an important lesson in that he's just an average person who's by doing what others were afraid to do set off a chain of events that took down an autocratic regime that we as Americans thought, the Soviet Union is going to be around forever, right? Like he set off a chain of events as a guy who just said, "I'm not taking it anymore." And that's an important lesson in and of itself. What I also discovered is though he was a welder from Gdansk and he was now the president, and the economy was a mess, and young people were disillusioned because they'd had all this energy and now they didn't have jobs. Um, and he needed, when we met with him, we said, you need to tell them that you're going to fight for economic improvement the way you fought communism he was a pretty stubborn guy. Wasn't going to do it. I will say this though. I mean, my work at that time was basically traveling around with what was the Polish equivalent of the Rolling Stones to college campuses, doing concerts and being the American guy in Poland at that time, going to college campuses was amazing because, and I had some cool experiences. You might find this funny. I took a group of the students that we were working with to Taco Bell, which had just opened in Warsaw, and they were giddy. Like they're like, America, yes.
Dude, that is incredible. I would say, okay, so real quick aside, guys, we got to
Yeah.
talk about this now. What are your, okay, fast food franchises? I'm going Taco Bell number one. Burger King and McDonald's are way down. Maybe for me, Wendy's number two.
Man.
And Bobby, you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
What do you
I
think?
mean, I'm from Atlanta. Chick-fil-A is at the top of the list.
Okay, yeah,
I
Chick-fil-A is
mean,
legit.
yeah, and then Taco Bell is in my top four. I'm not gonna lie.
Taco
Yeah.
Bell's,
But if and
you
here's
know
the
what you're
thing,
gonna get.
you talk about exporting America, right? So Taco Bell, McDonald's, those are the two that jump out, especially when the Soviet bloc broke up. I remember watching on
Yeah,
TV the lines on Nightline. Ted Koppel talking about they're waiting 2 hours to eat a Big Mac or McRoyal or whatever the heck they were talking about,
Right.
and I'm sitting there. I was like in high school. I'm just looking around like, really? For
you know,
but we underestimated what the whole fast food concept represented.
Right.
It's Americanism.
Well, the soft power that the U.S. had, right? Like
That
that
part.
was people didn't fight for freedom because of like, oh, I want democracy and vote. They were like, I want Levi's and a Big Mac
Bingo.
yeah,
and some
and so
Marlboros, not these crappy
yeah,
cigarettes.
it's sort of that's sort of one of the classic tenets of sort of the neoliberal idea, right? Is that capitalism and economic freedom goes hand in hand with political freedom, and we're seeing that, or we have seen that in many countries, but sort of not all, right? I mean, that's kind of
Right.
there's plenty of McDonald's in China, but without the political freedom. And I wonder if maybe what your thoughts are on in the places where economic freedom hasn't lined up with political freedom in quite the same way.
Here's the thing that I think all that experience, right, from working around the world, and I've worked in about 40 countries with people fighting for democracy or working to try and build democracy on 5 continents or after starting in Poland. Here's the thing people need to recognize. Like our founding fathers, and this sounds like kind of over the top, but it was a group of guys who got together, and it was guys because that's the way it was then. And we can argue white guys, actually rich white guys, but they got together and they said, listen, who holds power is this zero sum thing. We're going to create something called democracy where we wrap how you get power in a bunch of stuff that isn't focused on who can control the streets or what family you were born in. We're going to have elections. They're going to be regular. We're going to have a whole schoolhouse rock of checks and balances, right? America was founded on an idea. Democracy is an idea that it's a better way, and we've come to represent that idea. And capitalism's a part of it, and freedom and democracy, they're all part of it. What I found around the world is that idea has spread, right? And now it's being retrenching because those who want power to be zero sums, the Putins, the Lukashenkos, the Donald Trumps, I would argue, they want to hold power for their own ends to profit from it. And so that idea is antithetical to what they want. Their idea is I should hold power. That idea that people desired to have didn't necessarily manifest itself in that whole schoolhouse rock, although that was part of it, I have to say, but it was what's in it for me, like any idea that we gravitate to, right? And 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 for most people, it was I want to live like people in the West. And I think about Trump and these people, JD Vance attacking the European Union. What is the European Union, right? Like the European Union has taken that idea after World War II, after World War One, after a whole lot of Americans died and far more Europeans died, and they said we're going to embrace this idea. And then people that were living in the Soviet Union, my wife is Lithuanian, grew up in the Soviet Union. She was a Lithuanian diplomat, right? She went and stood up to Soviet tanks at 18 years old. But she'll tell you she wasn't standing up to Soviet tanks for the idea of, I want to have a vote. That was part of it. But it was, I'm tired of living like this. I want to have, Marlboros and Big Macs and she hates McDonald's, but Levi's and whatever, right? Like, and Donald Trump is not only attacking that at home, what they've done with USAID, the program I went and did in Poland. This is interesting, probably interesting. Was a USAID program. It was the first time they'd ever tried it, and the reason why I ended up getting asked to go to all these other places is we had success. And once you're the guy who's done something once, then all these people come out of the woodwork. The person who was running, who came up with the idea at USAID, and I never met her at the time. You know what her name was? Liz Janie.
Wow.
Huh.
How crazy is that? Yeah.
Huh.
Yep. She was working for USAID in Poland straight out of college. And by the time I got there and ran the program, but she had set the program up. Years later, when I met Liz, we ended up talking about that experience and how it's kind of shaped how we've responded to Trump.
So let's talk about that. So, Trygve, we first crossed paths through your work, I suppose, at the Lincoln Project, and then I've become aware of these 7 rules that you came up with, and 7 rules for dealing with autocrats. I believe it's sort of your pinned post on Twitter, but when did you come up with these rules? And I'd love for you to take us through them, and I'd love to talk about
Yeah.
what they mean today in America.
So the rules, so fast forward, I ended up I did the thing in Poland. I went back to running campaigns in the US, and I was having a fair amount of success on that. And I came out to Washington, D.C. in 1996 after the 96 elections. And I was going to get hired as the political director of the National Republican Congressional Committee. I mean, it basically was one of those deals where I had a U-Haul, I had all my stuff. I came out here, I was sleeping on a buddy's couch, and I just had to get hired. But it was preordained, it's like a Washington thing, who hires you. The night before I was supposed to go in and get hired, I went out and drank beers with the people I'd been in Poland with, because some of them, because they were based here. And they said to me, why are you going to do that job? We have this job in Lithuania. You should go do that, help build democracy there. And I said to them, and I'm a Wisconsin guy, so I think I'm pretty good at drinking beer. At the first beer, I'm like, I don't even know where the hell that is. Why would I want to go there? After about 6 beers, I was like, I'm going to Lithuania. So the next morning, this woman, Julie Mashburn, who I'll forever owe a debt of gratitude to, calls me up. I'm hungover. I'm supposed to go down to the NRCC at 1:00. She says, I've already talked to my boss. We want to hire you to go to Lithuania. Can you be here at 11? And I went and did the interview, and I'm like, I'll do it. So they're like, you need to be in Lithuania in 2 weeks. Then I went to the other interview, and the guy's like, I want to hire you. And I'm like, I'm going to Lithuania. So you fast forward from that. I end up going to work for him. Because I had this background with, I ended up doing work in Serbia when Milosevic was there. And I worked with 2 guys, Gene Sharp and Bob Halvey. Bob Halvey was like a general in the U.S. military, and he was one of the 2 experts on nonviolent resistance. So I learned not only how you get young people to mobilize, but how nonviolent resistance works. And that led to my doing all kinds of work with Belarusians and Russians and Iranians and all these people around the world who are fighting for democracy. After I went back to IRI, I set up the Belarus program because my wife got a job after graduate school at Georgetown as the national security advisor to the Speaker of the Parliament in Lithuania, and we helped them get into NATO and the EU. So we moved over there for 6 years. I set up the Belarus program. Eventually, I was declared an enemy of the Belarusian state by Alexander Lukashenko, and Putin's top deputy, Nikolai Patrushev, gave a speech in the Duma about the American in Vilnius who was creating chaos across their near abroad. That made my work a lot harder. We had decided McCain was running for president to move back here. Went to work on the McCain campaign. While I was doing that, I got asked to write a book for, it was going to go out to the public on all I learned about how you help people fighting for democracy. Eventually, it didn't get published, but it got used by like the Foreign Service Institute and others, pieces of it. Part of that book was 10 rules for dealing with autocrats. And they were rules when I would go to places, to sit down because I'd get asked to go speak around the world. So when I would drop in to work with Burmese, the first thing I'd do is I'd be like, all right, these are the 10 rules. When Trump kind of came on the scene, I'm like, this is the same stuff that I've seen in other places. And I sent somebody the manuscript and they're like, you should take those 10 rules and apply them to what we're facing in the US. And it became clear that 7 of those 10 rules fit. And the first rule is play the game you're in. One of the things I know, yeah. And one of the things, we have way too many people, that are focused on politics as they know it. That democracy, we're going to have elections, the schoolhouse rock of things, when Donald Trump's not playing that game. He's playing an autocratic game. It's a zero. Democracy's win-win. He's playing zero sum. Mm-hmm. So you have to understand the game you're in.
And so let's talk about that for a second, because of all of your rules, and they all have value, this to me seems to be like, there's a reason it's rule number 1, right? We are 100%. Not dealing, this is not Clinton versus Dole. We're not talking about .coms, we're talking about, are we going to deport American citizens to an El Salvadorian prison, right? Like this is happening now. And so playing the game we're in this circumstance, what does that mean? What does that mean to you in the broader context of elections, because that's sort of how we think about it? Is it a mistake to just focus on elections? And please discuss.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question that I keep asking people, and I'd like you guys to answer this. Is there anything that you've seen in the first 100 days of Donald Trump that suggests that Donald Trump or Elon Musk or any of these other enablers that are around him have any intention of giving back any of the power they have, including, are they really going to turn over a Congress that is a rubber stamp to them to a Congress that is going to hold them accountable? What have we seen that would indicate that they will do that peacefully?
Absolutely nothing.
It's you're right. I mean, so
that doesn't mean that elections won't be important. It doesn't mean that what it means strategically, and this is playing the game you're in, it means we have to stop assuming that standard rules apply.
Yes.
Okay? That's the first piece. The second piece is when they break norms, we have to break new ground. So if they're not honoring what the court's doing, Americans don't usually have to rise up and say, in America, we do what courts tell us to do, or we go to jail for contempt. Breaking new ground is we're going to stand up and we're going to defend new ground. And they end up connecting to some of the other rules, right? You might think John Roberts is the worst human being since Darth Vader, but he's your ally if he's saying, Donald Trump, you have to honor the rule of law, right? So you have to break new ground. And then I guess the next one is we have to focus on blocking their ability to govern unchecked. So when it comes to elections, anything that they're trying to do that undermines the 2026 elections, that has to be called out immediately. And we have to do everything we can to support that guardrail, right? I mean, it's like you guys have military background. I think a lot of the listeners do. If you have a flank that's under attack, you send more. You either concede the flank and let them run over you, or you beef up the flank, right?
Right.
That's what we have to do with the guardrails of democracy. That's the game we're in.
what do you think is the most likely? So one thing that MAGA seems to be decent at, right, is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, kind of reminds me of Bill Belichick as a New England sports guy, right? Like MAGA is, they seem to be decent at going through the fine print
Hmm.
and being like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
it doesn't say you can't do this anywhere. And so what does that look like for our side? I mean, what can the average citizen do aside from emailing your rep
And,
and, that
and
kind of
if I can
stuff?
jump in real quick, Dan, that is the
Yeah.
number one question, Trygve, that I have been getting the first 100 days of this administration. What
Yeah.
can we do? Because every day there's something else that erodes from the democratic norm, and people are like, I feel
Mm-hmm.
helpless. I feel helpless. Congress is doing nothing. What can I do?
Well, so I'm going to jump around on the rules a little
Let's
bit.
jump
All
Yep.
around.
right. So the last rule is expose, confront, and destabilize. Right? Wake up every morning and think about what can you do to expose, confront, and destabilize their vertical power structure, which starts with Donald Trump on the top giving edicts. Each of us brings something different to the table. Each of us probably brings something unique to the table, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I've talked about this on Twitter. I ended up following and communicating a little bit around the edges. Laura Ingram's brother
Yep.
calls her out all the time, right? That's
Yes.
his unique
Yeah.
skill. He's
Yeah.
uniquely positioned to do that. He thought about what can I do to destabilize it. Each of us, each of us has our powers that we can use. For some of us, it might be figuring out when you hear at church somebody who's been listening to Fox News, but who you know is a good person, not lecturing them about why Donald Trump's bad, because that's going to get you nowhere, but asking them questions about things that you know about how they live their lives that are antithetical to the policies that Donald Trump is pursuing. If I think about my church in rural Wisconsin, right? Like incredibly supportive of the Hmong community that
Sure.
came to the U.S. There's
Yeah.
people there that because they know him, who are like, well, we have to. These immigrants have added so much. Who are like, oh, we've got to deport these criminals because Donald Trump says so. Start asking them probing questions about where the incongruence and the cognitive dissonance lies, right? Each of us is going to have something new. You've got a podcast that speaks to people who have a military background where you can uniquely communicate what you guys were standing for when you were in the military and you were in places like Iraq or Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
how that's incongruent. You weren't fighting for a person, you were fighting for that idea, right?
Yeah. I
And you're
mean,
fighting for your buddies.
you're totally right. I mean, that was there's so much about Trump. Trump at times feels overwhelming because of how broadly fucked up he is. And, you know, if you can focus on your sort of narrow piece of the pie, right? Like, so if we're talking hockey, right? If you're, I'm going to use a basketball analogy here. I'm a little more familiar with that, but if you're, your job on this play that the point, it's an ISO play with the point guard and the power forward, and you're the small forward. I mean, your job is just to go off in the corner and drag defenders away, right? So, all of us can do something every single day. I mean, Bobby last night went on Stuart Stevens's podcast and it went on Malcolm Nance's podcast, and that's really the crux of the idea behind Veterans for Responsible Leadership is right. Is this guy is not one of us, right? And we can use our credibility from having fought in wars to to chip away. So let me ask
And
you
I
this.
think the one of the important things is like and I think about this a lot, right? Like growing up, and if you've ever been in a fist fight when you were a kid, you grew up playing hockey, you're in a few fights. The first
Yeah.
thing you learn is being in fights isn't all that much fun, right? Even if you win the fight, it hurts.
Yeah.
There's a cost to it. So you try, if you can figure out a better way to resolve your differences, you do that. But you got a lot of these people, like Donald Trump probably, who's never been in a fist fight in his life. So they walk around talking about how tough they are and want to fight everybody rather than convince them.
That's
And
that's
and
what
yet
Jupiter
they're
says
total
all the time.
cowards.
Yeah, Kinzinger's like, these people are pussies, right? Like, I mean, not
100%.
all of them, but like the ones who are doing politics, yes, they are. Like, these are
Yeah,
not people that they're even the roundups, even these sort of, we're going to deport American citizens. Well, it's not Donald
100%.
Trump doing that. It's police officers, right?
Right.
It's
And guys who've had to be in fights, right? Like in there's no way, and this is one of the things that comes back from my lesson on autocrats, right? Like the guys who are sitting there when you see things happening overseas, the guys with the batons, the Oman and whatever who are beating
Yep.
people up, they don't want to be beating up grandma. So I
Yes.
mean, one of the nonviolent resistance tactics that we used right away is, who you put when you're having marches. We had when I was doing work in Serbia, and it was Bob Halvey who said this to him, and I'm like, oh my god, this makes so much sense. So they were having these marches. They were all college students, right? They'd
Yep.
put all the tough college guys at the front, and the Oman would come in and just beat the living shit out of them with the tranches and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're telling Bob Harvey, well, God, they've all got bruises, like they're just beat to shit. And Bob Harvey says, do you have any grandmas or pretty girls that come to
Yeah.
these marches? And they're like, oh, yeah, we march in front of them because we don't want them getting beat up. He's like, why are you marching in front of them? Put
Right.
grandma and the pretty girls in front because you think the cops want to feel like tough. They feel like tough guys beating you up. They don't want to beat grandma up or their sister or their girlfriend, right? As soon as they started doing that, they're like, God, you guys are geniuses. Like, they don't want to beat them up. And it's like, yeah, of course, right? Play the game you're
That's
in.
really that's a pretty trenchant point. I mean, we think of back in, gosh, it must have been 2020 during the George Floyd protests, and which coincided with the Biden versus Trump election, the first one. There was a group called Wall of Moms,
Yeah,
and they would go to the George Floyd protests, and it was soccer moms, right? And they
right.
would stand in between sort of the fascist side, for lack of a better term, and the people marching with BLM signs and whatnot, and I'd have to look more into it, but I think the optics of that were pretty powerful. Number one, and I think you're right. I don't think Wall of Moms got beat up.
No,
Yeah,
no, I mean, you guys know that from like when you were in places like
yeah,
I didn't do the U.S. military. I was doing change by other means for the
yeah.
USG. But that said, I used to play football with the Marines from the embassy every Sunday, and those guys had all been deployed, and then they get to go and be at the embassy in Vilnius, which was awesome for them. But we'd go drink beer afterwards, and they'd talk about it. There was nothing worse than when they were in Afghanistan or Iraq and they would have to be dealing with an 80-year-old lady who they were having to, go and confront. Because,
Yep.
like, it's one thing, like, and that just kind of, that I would, if you're somebody who's here on a visa and somebody from ICE comes up to you and starts confronting you, you should start talking, and they're going to arrest you anyway. You should be saying to them, do you really want to be doing this? I'm just here studying. Like, I just
Yeah.
want, would you do this to your daughter? Your daughter's going to be next, or your son, right? Like, don't sit and argue with them about the specifics. That's what Trump wants. Argue with them about the bigger principle, which kind of gets to the next rule, right? Rule 5 is practice zero sum judo. Take their tactics and turn them against them, right? Like that is what judo's all about.
How do these guys? So expand on that. So how do these guys? I thought Lincoln Project was good at this,
Yeah.
specifically in 2020. How do you? What is a tactic? What is a MAGA tactic? What is a fascist tactic that we can use
Right.
on the side of good?
So there's a few things that kind of matter with this one. The first one is Donald Trump and any autocrat, Putin, Lukashenko, all of them. You can go back in history, Mussolini, Hitler, whatever. they try and hold power. Their strategy is, I am inevitable, I am invincible, and you should fear me. And you do what I want because you fear the fact that I am inevitable and I am invincible. If you can strip them of their inevitability or their invincibility, it all starts to fall apart. Because
Yeah.
if they're not going to be around forever, you have nothing to fear. If you think you can beat them, okay, you want to, and to Kinzinger's point, and your point, they're chicken shit anyway. So if you start, there's nothing a bully understands better than a right hook to the jaw,
Yep.
right? So you have to strip them of their inevitability and invincibility. One great way to do that, and that's kind of one of the things we tried to do with the Lincoln Project, is to mock them, because
Yeah.
you don't mock somebody, right, that you're afraid of. Back in the day, you weren't want to go up to Mike Tyson when he was, you're about the same age I am, right? In his heyday, you wouldn't want to go up and mess with Mike and start making fun of him, because that wouldn't end well, right? Like, mock them, show you're not afraid, make fun of them, point out their hypocrisy.
I
They hate
love
it.
that. I love that. There's Bobby and I are Naval Academy grads, so I'm gonna tangentially talk about World War II and the Pacific campaign here. So, when after Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
the Admiral Nimitz is sort of in charge. He gets tagged by Roosevelt to run the whole thing, but he's not really the warfighter. Like, Nimitz kind of stays in Pearl Harbor and is
Right.
moving the maps around. He doesn't go out to sea with the fleet. The two guys who largely do that are Bull Halsey, right,
Yep.
and Admiral Spruance. And Spruance is, as the war progresses, becomes sort of the man with the plan, right? Like, he does Okinawa, he does the invasion. I think he did the invasion of the Philippines. Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's an expert tactician. He's sort
He
of
did do it, because I read this book, The Rising Sun. Have you ever read
okay.
the book, The Rising Sun? He
So
did. I actually, that book was so good, I listened to it twice.
nice. So Spruance's whole thing is, he's very cerebral. He's very thoughtful. He's
Yeah.
not a flashy guy. Contrast that to Halsey,
Right.
who is, we're gonna kill him. We're gonna keep killing him. He's never seen a camera he doesn't like, and he's sort of got this chip on his shoulder.
Right.
He's going. He's like these Japanese Imperial Army, they ain't shit. We're gonna kick these guys' asses, right? And I think there's real value in that, in being sort of cocky
100%.
about we're gonna win. That's what I love the stuff that Kinzinger does. I love the stuff
Yeah.
that Liz Cheney does. Like, fuck you, man. We're gonna win. This is our country too, and
Right.
we're not afraid. And so I totally agree.
And honestly, the people who demonstrate that they're not afraid end up in a far better position when confronting these guys, usually, than those who cower in fear and try and, like, they don't, I don't know, it just, they respect those who stand up to
Right.
them. I think the other thing about, the other lesson from the war in the Pacific is the Japanese, right? They war gamed Midway, and they got their asses kicked and then they changed the rules of the war game, because they're like, you junior officers because they're like, the junior officers were like, well, if we were the Americans, we'd sail the fleet up north and come in behind. And they're like, you can't do that. They'll never do that, right? That, it was an autocratic mindset, right? And Donald Trump, like, no, what these guys, the tariffs are working great. What did it take to get him to back off? Literally, did you see the story today? Like, it took the CEOs of Walmart, Home Depot, Costco, and some other one going into the White House saying, you're going to have empty shelves in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Americans will go bananas if that happens, right? Like, that's Soviet Union falling apart shit.
Yeah.
That's what it took, because all those people around him, the tariffs are going good, right? Same lesson.
Yep. Just speak truth. Speak truth to power, right? Isn't that one of your, because you never
Well,
know-
so yeah, that's the
Talk about
next,
that one.
that's such a good pivot into always speak truth to power. Okay. So, autocrats fall because you reach a tipping point. Like when I would go in to work with people in Serbia or wherever, I would always talk about critical mass.
Yeah.
And critical mass obviously is the point where a nuclear chain reaction becomes self-sustaining, right? Like it's not going to stop because it just take on a life of its own. I can tell you everywhere where I've seen autocrats fall, there has been a point where usually it's through, mass resistance. And there is always a point where people just start coming. And the police are like, we're not stopping people anymore. I want change too.
Yep.
It's where fear switches. It goes from being afraid of the autocrat, I'm afraid what will happen to me if I stand up, to I'm afraid if I don't stand up, change won't happen. And you achieve that by speaking truth to power. Donald Trump wants to live in basically a truth-free presence. Like he's going to live in the present. He's going to say whatever, which is another one of the rules, right? Autocrats always live in a truth-free presence. It's tied to speak truth to power. We have to keep reminding people of the truth. The person who implemented the tariffs is not the Chinese.
Yeah.
It's not the Europeans. It's not those evil Canadians. It's Donald Trump who made that decision. That's speaking truth.
Right?
Exactly.
The reason you can't build the deck is because Canadian lumber is now twice as much.
Bingo.
And the person who did that is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Right? And like, who attacks the Canadians anyway? Like,
I know.
What the hell is that? Speaking of the Naval Academy, honest to God, I there are days when I miss McCain because the stupidity of some of this shit would just have set him off in a way that, and he would be the first to tell you, I think he finished second to last in his academy class.
Yeah.
But like, he'd be smart enough to figure out and to say it like, boy, this is shit.
Yeah. No, and it's kind of funny that you harp on that. This is my biggest issue with what's happening. And you're talking about your rules and the destabilization. The voices to counter this at the highest levels of government have been MIA, just missing in action. Yeah. When you have Senator Murkowski this past week say she's afraid, you're looking around like, but that's your job as not just a U.S. senator, but as a senior U.S. senator from the same party. Providing the oversight.
Bobby froze. We lost him, but to continue that thought, I think
it's mind blowing. I
think where he's going with that is looking at it on paper, looking at God, it's so close, right? It takes 5 Republican senators, and we're in a new world, right? If we win a couple House seats, if people put enough pressure on their representatives, all of a sudden you do have an institutional check. The idea that we can do nothing to stop this man and it's inevitable. I mean, it's wild to think that some people think about that.
Well, think about this. This is the thing that drives me crazy, Dan.
Yeah.
So about 2 years ago, we were over in Europe because we spend part of our summers in Lithuania because I want my daughters who are 15 and 13 to understand, right?
Yep.
But we went. They wanted to go see Paris, and I said, "All right, I'll pay for us to go see Paris, but we're going up to Normandy, and you're going to walk the beach. You're going to walk Omaha Beach. You're going to walk the."
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it in terms of my Lincoln Project stuff, and I've thought about those boys a lot because any American who has the chance to go to Normandy needs to go to Normandy. And I thought about it in terms of Lisa Murkowski, actually, which is what triggered this. She literally was on tape saying, well, a lot of my peers and I are afraid. And
right.
All I could think is, you think those boys who were storming onto that beach for the idea weren't afraid? You think A.D. Halverson, who's from my hometown, who survived the Bataan Death March, wasn't afraid? You look in the mirror and you see a leader. You see a U.S. senator and you think, I'm a leader? But you're afraid to stand up to this guy when so many people gave so much? It just infuriates infuriates me to my core. You're
Yeah.
afraid?
Right.
Sometimes democracy requires you to be afraid. Sometimes democracy requires that you give up your life.
Yeah.
And you're in the United States Senate and you don't get it?
Yep.
Just,
The,
sorry to
to
rant,
have those
but God, it
words
pisses
come
me
out,
off.
to have those words come out of a United States senator of such senior status is mind blowing. I mean, to put it in perspective, the head of the Senate majority in 1974 walked from Capitol Hill to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to tell Richard Milhouse Nixon, "You will be impeached tomorrow if you do not resign."
Yep.
Same party.
Yep.
And he was at the same party.
Same
Yep.
party. World War II vets, like all of them were World War II and Korea vets, Vietnam vets. That whole Congress was a bunch of veterans, most of whom fought to stop fascism and to stop these things around the world. They had no qualms saying this is a bridge too far. This is not how it works. And we are exercising our authority given to us by the Constitution of the United States to provide congressional oversight. Period. There was no debate.
And it's crazy. They see great men when they look at themselves in the mirror. Marco Rubio and all the rest.
Man,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
They're shadows of the giants that walk before them. They're shadows of the 18-year-old kid who ran off the beach. They're shadows of the pastor where I grew up, Pastor Byrne, who flew 22 missions as a bomber pilot from the UK. He was a ball turret gunner and survived. He enlisted at 17. They're shadows of those giants. And they profess to be leaders.
Yes.
You know, one thing that I've got an idea, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. So,
Right.
so one thing that I've always, since Trump has been in a part of our life, I've always thought if I was a cynical, self-serving, almost amoral Republican, right? At some point, there's going to come a moment when I can most boost myself by turning on Trump,
Yeah.
right?
For
Like
sure.
there's going to be some member of Congress who's like, this is the moment and I want to be the next president and I want to be the future of the Republican Party. And the way to do that is to kick him to the curb. And I really believe that like that moment could happen if it weren't for the lack of courage that people show. You know?
You're so spot on because here's the thing, right? People with autocratic personality disorder, which I think Donald Trump has, that's just a term that came from my book, but they're all the same personality type. The thing is, people think Vladimir Putin is doing what he's doing in Ukraine. Why is he doing it? His underlying driver is he's afraid. He's afraid that if Ukraine becomes a fully functioning democracy that's far more prosperous than Russia, Russians are going to say, we want that too, and it's Putin, right? Donald Trump does what he does because he's afraid. They're all cowards and they're living in fear, so they try and impose fear on everybody else. The standing up to them, the reason that they don't is the more afraid that the autocrats become, the more violent they become. Putin's an example of that, right? Like, but you think those guys who fought in World War II, and I think to some degree, like we're all Gen Xers, and I know for myself, if I hadn't had the experiences that I had overseas, where my good friend Boris Nemtsov, his number is still on my phone. He was the leader of the Russian opposition before Navalny. He was gunned down in front of the Kremlin. Most people, you guys serving in the military, understand what it's like to have people that you know, people who you've fought together with, people who are standing for that idea, make the ultimate sacrifice for the idea. Right? But if I hadn't had those experiences, which were just kind of dumb luck that I got asked to go to Poland in 1993, I probably wouldn't have understood that. I'd been the typical Gen Xer who's like, yeah, Wolverines, I'll go live in the mountains and be Patrick Swayze if democracy is ever under attack and take my shotgun and my AR, right? There's an element. A big part of the problem, the biggest voting block for Donald Trump was Gen X white dudes in rural areas. Like, we are the problem, right? It's not even our wives to a degree. It's not our kids. It's us. And and you know, I you look at a lot of the political leadership. Is a Ted Cruz ever going to get that, or is he just going to sit and wait to see where the wind blows? Or Marco Rubio? But you're right. Somebody is going to stand up, and this is the thing. Like the Cheneys, the Kinsingers, those people who history has stood up, maybe they end up being that. Or at a minimum, at least they can look their kids in the eye. And this is why I decided to be a part of Lincoln Project. At least I can look my kids in the eye and say I tried. And if it cost me my life for doing it, I'll feel bad for the things I missed, but they'll forever know that dad did what he could so that they could have it better than they had it. And the other side of this, those guys, they all think it's going to end well for them. How did it end for Mike Pence? It
Yeah,
never ends well. How's it ended for Elon Musk? Not well.
the pillow
It
guy.
never ends well.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Um,
Never.
so I think that kind of brings us to rule number 6 a little bit, which is also a
100%.
terrific rule, right?
Yeah.
Rule number 6, if I'll just go ahead and read it, but basically the Stalin rule: stand
Yeah.
together with anyone who will join you, right? And so
Yep.
this is one of my frustrations with the Democratic Party, which I align myself kind of ideologically with,
Yeah.
is sort of these purity tests of, and I'll use an example on SCOTUS, which is Amy Coney Barrett, who I found kind of terrifying
Right.
as a potential nominee, but she's kind of been on Team Democracy on all these
Yeah.
votes as of late, right? And
Right.
so, what are your? I mean, can you just explain that one a little bit, right? Like, what the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the ways that it gets put. I named it the Stalin Rule because remember I was working with all these people who grew up in the Soviet Union, and if they have a very if somebody who's educated in the Soviet experience, they have a very different worldview. I mean, when my wife came to Georgetown, she called me up one day and she was all in tears because she didn't know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. They didn't cover that over there, but she's like, "That's awfully interesting to learn about now." I'm like, "You don't know about the Cuban Missile Crisis?" I thought it was funny. Um, but so Stalin, right? He's the second worst human being probably to ever walk the planet. You could maybe argue that Pol Pot was pretty bad in the killing fields, but Stalin murdered a lot of people. And Churchill and Roosevelt understood fully who they were getting in bed with, right? But they did it because they're confronting the worst person to ever walk the face of the earth.
Yep.
And you can think that Liz Cheney or the guys at the Lincoln Project or George W. Bush or any of these people are your enemy in the game, But in the game you're in, if they're standing for democracy, they're your ally. And even Mike Pence, okay? You know what? He did a lot of reprehensible stuff from my book that I wouldn't have done, but he did the right thing when it mattered. And when he speaks up, if he speaks up, he should speak up more, but he doesn't. When he is speaking up, he's your ally. And you just have to live with the fact that they're imperfect allies. Stalin was killing millions of Lithuanians and Baltic state people and Poles at the same time that he was our ally.
Right.
Not all that different from Hitler, but Hitler had to be stopped. That's the point.
That's a
And, it's hard for people to get. I got asked to speak to a group when Cheney was really kind of coming out in against Trump, even before January 6th. These people were like, "Oh, but she's 100% pro-life." I'm like, "Yep, she
Right.
is."
Yeah.
But you know what? It's not about that. That's the game you're in. It's not about that.
Right.
And that gets to the next rule, which I think is the seventh one. Don't hand the autocrat battering rams with which to beat you. And I think your frustration with the Democratic Party, my frustration is there are way too many elements in the Democratic Party that are handing Donald Trump the battering rams with which he beats all of us all the time.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right. I think that's right. Desensitizing us is part of it, right? Trump
huge.
will say something a year before he actually intends to do it, to test the waters, and they make it seem like a joke or whatever. But we're in a situation where we're talking about American citizens being deported to an El Salvadorian prison. So,
Right.
um, Trygve, that was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your work and enjoy being on Team Democracy with you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time. Do you have any? Where can folks find you if they want to read more of your work?
So they can find me on Blue Sky. I'm not exact. I know it's under Trygve, Trygve Olson. I've never been able to figure out. The X thing was so easy. I'm still on X. I haven't been tweeting as much. But I am going to start doing more stuff on Blue Sky. You can find the 7 rules there. You can find out more about what Dan you were just talking about, which is autocratic intention signaling. They always tell you exactly what they're going to do about a year from now. So, yeah, they can find me there. I'm on the various podcasts and other stuff all the time. And every Wednesday, I'm on something called Civic Media, which is all across Wisconsin, but you can download the Civic Media app. It's the Todd Albaugh Show. Talk about all these things for an hour. So.
Awesome. Thanks again, Trygve. It was truly a pleasure.